Whenever a new episode of Game of Thrones comes out, all of us veterans know to put on our emotional armor to protect ourselves from getting too attached to these characters we know horrible things are going to happen to. And so when episodes like these come around and they break through that armor without us even knowing it, it really gets us to the end of the episode and we feel surprised. Not because we didn't see a particular plot point coming or a certain character interaction, but because we actually cared and attached to these characters more than we ever thought we could or would let ourselves. All the ways we use to unconsciously protect ourselves, like criticizing characters so we don't get attached to them, and hiding our feelings behind plot holes, didn't really work this episode because it wasn't a huge amount of things happening. All we could do is sit there and watch the unflinching, genuine emotions of the characters in front of us. Even myself, who made prior videos talking about how they would use all of these characters to emotionally manipulate us, still got roped in. They broke down my armor one chink at a time, with every Brienne smile, Theon hug, and Podrick lyric. So even though it was a slow episode, it was just nice to have a genuine and heartwarming episode. So let's get into some of the juicy things that actually went down. Now to start off with, I have to say that Jaime was the highlight of the entire episode. Not only did he have the most screen time and really awesome interactions with people like Tyrion and Brienne and Bran, but also Jaime's one of those characters whose history and baggage was the most important to his arc as a character, and it's really stayed with him throughout his entire life ever since he killed the Mad King. And as I've mentioned before, this episode really did seem like they were trying to focus on moving past the previous conflicts they've had and focusing on this new threat. And Jaime definitely was in the best position to explore that to the maximum. Like, I knew he had all this baggage with certain characters that we'd seen like Bran, but you sometimes forget about the impact he's had on other characters like Dany, who he's never met before. Jaime's entire life, he's kind of been on public trial, but not properly, so he's never been acquitted and never been guilty, so he's kind of always been in this limbo land where he couldn't really resolve those past things that he really had trouble with. But now he finds himself in a room getting judged and tried by the daughter of the Man King and the daughter of Eddard Stark, the person who Jaime sees as the first person to kind of publicly and socially condemn him for his actions. So it's actually really nice to see that all of the things he's done over the last series that's transformed him as a character and the relationship he's built up with people like Brienne have really come back to help revitalize his character and give him a place in this new group of people. It was even another step when Bran kind of forgave him because he can see his entire life and everything he's done, and he can see how he's evolved as a character to be a better person now. I did also quite enjoy that moment where Jaime and Tyrion are walking along through Winterfell and she's like, "Oh, Cersei's fooled me more than anyone." But Tyrion doesn't really give it to him at all because he can see right through him, and he knows that he's been fully aware of how Cersei is and how she behaves his whole life. He just kind of looked past it. Now, this episode wasn't nearly as political as the previous one. It was more heartfelt about characters connecting, preparing for what's going to happen next episode, but we did get that really nice scene with Dany and Sansa kind of facing off. It almost gave me vibes of like Cersei and Marjorie Tyrell, where it's kind of polite and cordial, they're trying to make a bridge, but there's also this underlying theme that they really don't trust each other and they have very different political goals. It also surprised me a lot that a lot of characters started jumping for defending Tyrion. Tyrion has increasingly become more and more isolated by Dany because he just keeps failing on the most important parts of his job. Now, of course, this isn't all Tyrion's fault. He has had a lot of miscommunication with Dany, where they haven't shared information properly. And also it's becoming more clear that Tyrion really didn't have the same goals as Dany. Dany was focused on getting the Iron Throne, establishing a rule, and really taking the position she thought she rightfully had, where Tyrion was more focused on making sure the realm was better off. So if she was to conquest it with fire, it wouldn't really help the realm, but she would get in power. So he wants to do it in a way that he gets both of his things at the same time, where she gets to rule because she'd be the best ruler, but she doesn't ruin the country in the process. Now, Arya was a really interesting character to watch over this episode. We got a decent amount of scenes with her. Like every member of the Stark family, she has this wall up around everyone around her, where it seems like every interaction you had can't be fully honest and genuine because they can't get through that barrier of things they just don't know what happened to her in her life. They have vague ideas of where she went and what happened and how she's evolved, but they don't really understand how her brain works still. Now, she's not alone in this. Of course, Bran is the most obvious, Sansa has her own walls up, and even Jon has his own set of experiences that keep him at a distance from people around him, e.g. dying. But Arya has a pretty stark contrast to someone like Sansa. Now, Sansa has evolved to be less trusting and more suspicious of people. She takes time to really get them in close. But as we saw this episode, she can be vulnerable and trusting of people who earn that in her life. Like when Theon came back to fight for Winterfell and they hugged and they talked and they ate together, that was truly her connecting on a human-to-human level with him. where with Arya, we haven't quite got that yet. She seems to come close with a few different characters like the Hound, but they just never quite fully connect the way other characters do. You can kind of see through the surface a little bit of how she cares about these people and the way she acts and stuff, but she just doesn't open up at all. And even in the scene with Gendry, where she becomes physically intimate with him, and we get that montage of Podrick singing and all these different characters bonding and singing together and waiting for the battle to come, her shot with Gendry seems like they're still very distant and icy. She's staring into the distance, not really focusing at all, and he looks very uncomfortable in the background. Like in contrast to her, the Sandhill Grey Worm seemed really heartwarming. But we did get a whole bunch of other really nice scenes where characters were just genuinely interacting with each other, helping each other out, and get them to be ready for what's going to come. Giving this really nice balance where the episode as a whole was still really pleasant. Like that scene where Davos is talking to the would-be soldiers and talking with that girl who has a scar on her face reminding us of Serene. It really meant us to be able to see how everyone can pitch in and step up. They all have roles, they're all helping each other out. Even someone like Gilly has a really important role to try and keep everyone together and sensible. Now, I must give the show credit for being quite clever at having this little scene where Sam, Dolorous Ed, and Jon Snow were up on the wall like it was old times back at Castle Black. They had some clever banter and quips back and forward, but mainly it kind of brought us to remember how it was in Season 1 and how far all of these characters come since that moment. But nothing comes close to how awesome the scene was around the fire with Brienne, Tormund, Davos, Podrick, Jaime, Tyrion. It was just perfect. Tyrion himself quite cleverly pointed out how very different all of the people here were. All of them had fought against the Starks at one point. They all had different loyalties and cultures and ways they just thought about anything. To your noble knights, to bookworms, to just sculling a bear in front of everyone, to dripping it everywhere. The way they used Tormund in that scene was just pure genius. And then of course we get that awesome moment with Brienne. You could see how someone like Tyrion and Davos were so dumbfounded by the fact that you were sitting there together waiting for an army of the dead to attack you in your castle, and you're still worried about tradition and whether it's appropriate or not to be knighted, when you as a character are the perfect reflection of the values that a knight should have. And the way she almost doesn't accept it at first, she's like, oh, no, he's just joking, can't be. And then it dawns on her that, wait, this is happening, this is actually happening. And it was Jaime Lannister as well that was knighting her, which meant probably way more to her than any just random knight. It's one of those moments where the show can tell us that it's not kingdoms and traditions that can provide meaning to someone, it's other people, the people in that room that provided meaning to her. No one objected, everyone was just genuinely happy and clapping and cheering and just sharing in the moment of joy that she was having. And so with that, we get this beautiful song from Podrick, where we cross between all the characters, whether it's Sam and Gilly with their baby, the people around that fire, Theon and Sansa, Sandy and Grey Worm, Jorah, and all of the knights, Dothraki, Unsullied, and random villagers who have banded together to fight for Winterfell. And now that we feel hope and inspiration for the future of all these characters, we share in their emotion and joy, and we're tied to their futures, I'm sure nothing ever will happen bad to them. Totally gonna be okay. Show's gonna end all really good. Like, what could possibly go wrong? So with that, we end the episode with Jon finally revealing the secret we've had for so long to Dany. And the horns blow and the people run as the White Walkers make their advance. Tell me you guys descriptive, detailed thoughts on what happened in this episode in the comment section below. I'd really love hearing what you guys think. Especially want to hear how you guys reacted to certain scenes. Like lots of people have had different mixed reactions to what happened with Arya or what happened with Jon and Dany. It's always my favorite part to hear what you guys think.